This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Dan Lynch and I talked with Richard North of AtomicJar and Testcontainers, which was an unexpected success. He was the dog that caught the bus, and we talk about all kinds of ways that a success can happen in open source, where all of a sudden you're in charge of a whole development project where you were a one-man operation before, and getting funding for that, starting a .com and a .org for it, running all of the development and where all this goes, what's happening with containers in general and what the view on that with test containers might be. It's a lot of stuff, and that's all coming up next.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 646, recorded Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. AtomicJar and Testcontainers. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get the password manager that offers a robust and cost-effective solution that can drastically increase your chances of staying safe online. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. And by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics big, small, and strange. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hello again. Good morning, good evening, good whenever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is Floss Weekly, joined this week by Dan Lynch. Morning, Dan. Or evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Where are you?
Hey, Doc. It's the evening here, just almost evening. Yeah, I'm coming to you from sunny Liverpool. For once, it is actually sunny as well. We're having kind of unseasonal 2-day heat wave. By the end of the week, it's due to go back to our normal weather. Yeah, but I'm in the northwest in the UK, going across the pond.
I only found out not that long ago that your football club is owned by some Americans. Is that and?
It's very true. John Henry. Yeah. John W. Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Boston guy. So they
think he owns the Red Sox. Does he own the Red Sox as well? Yeah.
I think so. I think I lived there for years, but I've lost track since I left. You know, I still root for the teams, but not for the owners. So yeah, but you have fans over here. So are you familiar with our guest today is Richard North, and I'm wondering how familiar you are with his work and with AtomicJar and what he's gone through, because he's going to share that with us.
Yeah, so to be honest, only what I've basically read in the last 24 hours, but I've been looking through Testcontainers and some of the stuff that they're doing, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, testing is one of these things that it's not seen as being very attractive or sexy or whatever you want to call it, but it's something that's so important to software releases. Obviously, we've all experienced stuff that hasn't been tested properly and felt the pain of that. So, the suite of tools they've got that we're going to talk about with Richard looks really, really cool.
Yeah, and sort of the story arc of what he went through. There's a little, I gather from the pitch letter we got, and we get a lot of those, but some of them we accept, and this is a really interesting one, of what happens when you start a project and it catches on. There's a moment, I suppose, it's a little bit like the dog that caught the bus, but then finds out they're running the bus after a while. So it's going to be interesting. So I can't wait to get to that. But first, I have to let everybody know that that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, at work, or on the go, and is trusted by millions. Empower your employees to follow password management best practices. With Bitwarden, you can securely store credentials across personal and business worlds. Every Bitwarden account begins with the creation of a personal vault. Use Bitwarden for your business. It's fully customizable. Adjust features using enterprise policies to adapt to your business needs. Use Bitwarden Send, a fully encrypted method to transmit sensitive information, whether text or files, directly to anyone. Team members can generate unique and secure passwords for every site. You'll get enterprise-grade security and they're GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and SOC 2 compliant. Their end-to-end encrypted vault helps mitigate phishing attacks by storing passwords and more. Bitwarden now has new tools for managed service providers. Bitwarden's new provider portal allows MSPs to easily manage clients' password management services all in one place. Allows for simple access to each separate organization. 2 new user types allow for delegation of management and ensure clear differentiation between the service provider and client users. Interested in a business plan? Bitwarden has plans that will work for you. Their team's organization option is $3 a month per user, where you can share private data securely with your coworkers, department, or entire organization. For enterprises, use Bitwarden's Enterprise Organization Plan for just $5 a month per user. Their free organization plan includes 2 users who can store and share secure passwords. Bitwarden believes that everyone should have access to basic password management security tools. Individuals can use their basic free account forever for an unlimited number of passwords or upgrade anytime to their premium account for less than $1 a month. And if you're looking for secure password storage for your entire family, their family organization option gives up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Using the Bitwarden cloud, you can get started in no time, monitor and manage security vulnerabilities using the Bitwarden Vault Health Reports, identify exposed, reused, weak, or potentially compromised passwords, as well as any items in your vault with inactive 2FA. Get started with a free Teams or Enterprise trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan at bitwarden.com/twit, or try it for free across devices as an individual user. That's bitwarden.com/twit. Okay, well, I want to welcome Richard North. He's the Chief Technology Officer at AtomicJar and the creator of Testcontainers. He created Testcontainers in 2015 while Chief Engineer at Deloitte Digital. He observed that integration testing is hopelessly complicated setup, everything from creating consistent, I don't have to read that one over, from creating consistent local setups to configuring databases and countless other issues, was a constant source of thrashing for developer teams that needed a reliable way to test their code against real production like dependencies. He built Testcontainers as an open source library that lets developers directly from their test code test with the containers against everything from data stores and databases. And it goes on. It's a long introduction, and I'm going to stop there. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so where are you? I see you're indoors, but besides that, I can't tell.
Yeah, everybody's indoors these days. I'm down in southeast England, so somewhere near London.
So where exactly? I've worked
my
in
closest
Southampton. Yeah.
So I'm northwest of London, up in near a town called Watford.
Yeah, I have 2 of my kids went to college, one at Suffolk, one in Birmingham, and did a lot over there over the years. So your story is one. Am I wrong to characterize it maybe as the dog that caught the bus? You started something for your own purposes that seemed to work well, and all of a sudden you have a following and a responsibility. And tell us how that went, and then we can kind of dive into parts of it.
Yeah, I've not heard that phrase before, but I think it's perfectly apt. It's a great way of describing it. So yeah, as you said, I had been working for a number of years in software development, and one of the problems that we always encountered was integration testing being a difficult thing. Integration testing is a thing that we tried to bring back earlier into the development process. We try to ensure that developers can do it repeatably, do it themselves without having to rely on a separate test team or a separate test environment in order to carry out those activities. We've always believed that bringing that kind of activity back into an automated testing regime is a better approach than leaving it to later. The trouble is it's just hard because you have to ensure that your developers are able to run tests for their system and all of the things that it needs to communicate with. So for example, back when things were simpler and it was just a simple 3-tier application, you might have your app server needs to talk to a database. But you still had to ensure that that database was installed on every developer's machine, configured exactly the same way. Then you had to ensure that it was set up in the same way on your CI testing environment, and it all added up. It became a lot of thrashing for developers in order to get that installation working the right way and to keep it in a working state. So test containers. I had seen this problem for years, and with the introduction of Docker, I realized that actually we could harness Docker, and with the right kind of sort of integration with the test frameworks for Java, which was the language I was using primarily at the time, with the right integration with the test frameworks, we could ensure that containerized dependencies could be spun up for you. So, for example, your tests need to test a piece of your code or a service that talks to a database. We could ensure that that database would be up and running by the time your tests need it, and then torn down again afterwards. Docker was a really great enabling tool for that. And that is kind of the essence of test containers, to harness Docker in a way that makes it easier to perform automated integration testing.
So that sounds very, very cool, Richard. I like the idea of using containers for this because it's so quick, and you can, as you say, you can make sure they're there when you need them, and then just kind of delete them, destroy them when you don't. So Doc's already kind of alluded to this a bit, but was this something that you did to scratch your own itch initially? Was this something that you were bumping up against in your daily work that made you want to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. I would say it was a problem that we encountered on every single project, and we started out, for example, running around with CDs and a printed wiki page of how to install things. Then we progressed to things like Chef and Puppet to help set up dev machines in the way that they would be needed for testing. But it still didn't feel like the right approach. So yeah, it was absolutely a case of scratching my own itch. It seemed like a problem that was still not solved well. So I created test containers to solve that.
And has it grown quicker than you expected? Because it seems to be quite a big project now. It's grown into this massive kind of thing that's really kind of exploded, I suppose. Yeah.
It was at the beginning. I thought, okay, I'm going to put this out there. I'll blog post about it. Maybe a few people will use it. Probably people who I already know. And maybe after 6 months, I'll have completely finished it. There'll be nothing left to do. It did not turn out like that at all. 6 years later, I'm still working on it. Many people are using it at many companies, large and small, all over the world. And many people contributing improvements and new features and bug fixes to it as well.
So what? Yeah. Sorry, go on.
It just really has surpassed my wildest expectations as a project.
Brilliant. And that's really good. I mean, we see this we hear this story quite a lot in the open source world, where somebody will start a project for their own kind of ends, and then it'll grow into something else. But I think that's really important, that the way that it's kind of, gathered momentum and stuff. It sounds really cool. So you've given us a kind of an overview. So just to get the kind of 50,000 foot viewers, as they call it sometimes. So it's a tool for automate it. Can I use it to automate my testing, so I can have automated unit tests on code that I'm developing?
So it hooks in with your test frameworks that already do that automated testing. So for example, in Java, the predominant one is JUnit, and that runs your tests automatically as part of your build process. And traditionally, it's used for mainly unit tests, so very small pieces of code under test. It's also usable with test containers for integration testing. So yeah, that's it really. Test containers integrates with JUnit, integrates with other testing frameworks as well. Really, we try to let developers use it in the way that they need to use it. So while we have these integrations with a testing framework, creating a container or saying that your tests need a container really is as simple as just adding a couple of lines of code to the test. Say, for example, I need a new Kafka container, and then on this object you call start, and that's it. The container will be running when your tests are running. You can connect to it from your code. You can tell your application under test where to connect to it. And yeah, it really is. We aim to make the API as simple and as easy as possible to use.
Yeah, I mean, I had a look at some of the examples that you've got on your site there and some of the other things, and it really looks, I mean, I'm no fantastic programmer, I have to admit. No one's going to argue with that. But it did look really simple to use. So you just call it and it'll make an instance for you, and you can do all that kind of stuff, which is very cool. I was interested in the way you've got what are called modules as well, which, so if I wanted to expand the functionality, or if I wanted to have a different kind of container or running something different to run my tests, I could create a module for that. Was that important to you in the design of the system, that you wanted people to be able to extend it and add modules and reconfigure it and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So Testcontainers at its core has generic support for containers. So the abstraction that Docker popularized with containers, images, network ports, volume mounts, that kind of thing, that's a really great abstraction to build upon. So Testcontainers at its core has this sort of generic container abstraction. But also there are additional things you might want to do in different contexts. So for example, you want to launch a database. How do you know, or how can your tests start after that database is actually ready to use it? So we created specialized modules, like essentially subclasses for databases that perform test queries. So your test code won't be asked to execute before the database is fully up and running, before it's passed some test queries. With the modules that we created, there's just basically some specializations to make things easier according to the type of product you're using, type of container you're using. And it was, I believe, quite important in the adoption of test containers as well, allowing people to extend it. And also, even though maintaining the project has been a huge amount of work, I think allowing people to create those modules themselves has been a way to reduce the amount of centralized work that we've had to perform.
I mean, that's one of the power of open source, and that's one of the real things that we benefit from in this kind of ecosystem, is people coming in and contributing and maybe doing things with it that you wouldn't expect. Has anybody or has any of the clients that use it done anything that you unexpected, that you thought, wow, that's cool, I didn't really expect them to use it in that way, but they have done?
So, I guess probably one of the most interesting examples like that is chaos testing. So you have a system under test, you have a dependency that it needs to connect to. And the approach of chaos testing, of injecting faults into the connection between those components, is quite an increasingly popular one. But it's commonly done in a full-blown test environment, like you might have a replica of production, or you might use it in production yourself. To inject faults between the code under test and its dependencies. With test containers, though, you can do it in an isolated fashion. You can say that you can literally just have your code running on your local dev machine, and it's one dependency. And we have a module that allows people to inject faults. I wasn't expecting that to be as popular as it is, but it has seen some interesting usages. People picking that up and using that to simulate what happens if their dependency goes down or their network connection becomes really slow, that kind of thing.
I'm wondering, in your own story, Richard, as and I'm thinking here about listeners and viewers who might be going through a similar experience of deserving but not necessarily expected success. What are some signs that all of a sudden a project is taking off and that your life is going to change as a result of that? And then once it does, obviously developers are showing up as well, not just usage, right? I imagine that's the case. And how do you start seeing, well, who's a future maintainer or committer or whatever term you want to use for a participant?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think for me, one of the early signs that it was starting to become its own thing was when when people were just spontaneously talking about it at conferences, people who I had never spoken to, who I didn't know about, talking about this at conferences, and I realized that actually they've read about it, they've tried it, they've liked it, and they're willing to invest their time and energy in promoting this thing that they're not involved in either. That they just want to share it for the love of the tool. That for me was not only a thing that made me realize that it had taken on a life of its own, but it made me so proud and I'm so excited and happy. So it's not just about the numbers of people using it, the number of stars on GitHub, but it's about seeing people talking excitedly about the tool. That's really nice for me. And with respect to to other people contributing to it, to co-maintainers, I built up a great relationship with my colleague Sergey Egorov about 5.5 years ago. So he contributed to the project fairly early on, and also with Kevin Vitek, who's another one of the lead maintainers of Testcontainers. We sort of established a rapport over GitHub issues and email, talking about issues on the project, and I realized that they had a lot of really great ideas to bring to the project, things that I hadn't thought of, things that I didn't have time to do. They were just bringing energy and enthusiasm to the project. So it seemed like a no-brainer for me to invite them to co-maintain the project along with me, and I'm so glad I did. So in the situation of a project that takes off and you don't have the time and energy to achieve everything you want to yourself, having other people doing those things is really good.
Yeah, it's almost to switch metaphors, it's almost like you're in a boat and all of a sudden other people who have more oars or paddles and they're all pulling along with you. And so now is this a full-time gig at this point? And is it your full? Do you have a day job that's somewhere else? And I'm sort of curious about your organizational framework as well and how you set that up. Because I see you have both AtomicJar.com, which is commercial, and you also have Testcontainers.org, which is non-commercial. And there are other examples of that where you have a .com and a .org, though not necessarily with different names. So you had to go through a decision process there, or you and your colleagues did in the course of saying, what other boats do we put this thing in, and what do those boats look like? So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how the process involved in that.
Yeah, so until the 6-year mark, it was just a hobby project, a side project. I was working at Deloitte Digital and then also at Skyscanner after that, and just working on Testcontainers on the side. And it was the same for my other co-maintainers as well. At around the 6-year mark, we realized that, yes, this is a thing that's going to carry on, but also we realized that actually we want to change things. We want to do things a little bit differently. We want to put more energy into this project, more time into this project than we can give with it being something we're doing on the side. So at that point, earlier this year, we decided to found AtomicJar, which is the company of which I'm CTO, and Sergey is CEO. It's a company which we've formed around Testcontainers. The goal of the company is we want to make testing easier for developers. We didn't call it Testcontainers.com, for example. We do believe that there are many testing challenges and indeed other software development challenges that we'll tackle over the life of the company. But for now, we're focusing on Testcontainers. We want to create products and services that are really valuable to Testcontainers users, and also greatly improve their experience as well.
So tell me about the funding model. Is it do you have venture capital behind it, and how is it sustained? I mean, do you have voluntary contributions? What's for sale? What's not? And I'm especially interested in how that grows over time.
Yes, of course we have to make a profit. We're VC backed by primarily by Bold Start Ventures. We're playing our cards slightly close to our chest at the moment. No, we're not announcing the specific service that we're going to be launching quite soon. We're not in a position to be announcing that just yet. We're in a sort of private beta phase, trying it out with people to make sure it all works well before we go totally public with it. But yes, the business model is that we will produce products and services that are complementary to test containers. One of the difficult things that we had to think about when setting up the company is we created test containers as like a labor of love. We have a great community around it, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to do anything which is going to annoy or irritate our user base, because they deserve better than that. So what we're doing with AtomicJar, while I can't give all of the details, is to create things that are complementary to test containers. We're not intending to suddenly lop off half of what test containers does and say you have to pay for this. That's not what we want to do. We had to think quite carefully about what we're going to do, and hopefully in due course our users will be happy with what we announce.
I had I still have one actually, but it's not as active as it used to be, a consultancy, a corporate consultancy in Silicon Valley. And one of the ways we had of simplifying the growth of a company or describing it is that there were 3 stages: new, and then hot, and then big. And I'm not sure big is different for different projects, and there are some, the one I'm most familiar with is Linux, because I was an editor for Linux Journal for too many years. But, what it got new and hot and big, but what ended up getting big was just usage. And, without any .orgs or, a zillion .coms, but Linus himself kind of ricocheted around between this and that. I think you've got something that's more small and contained, as it were. What I'm wondering is if you have a sense of, and it sounds like you do, of this gets to a certain size and then it kind of plateaus and it becomes something that's important in the world, but is one of many things, and they kind of overlap. Is there a sense that you have right now that you're kind of near the max of where you're going to be size-wise, or that, I'm sort of interested too of what the ecosystem around it is. I have some thoughts about containers too, but I'm wondering if you have a sense of where in growth that you are right now. So yeah, is looking at we don't track detailed telemetry of how much it's being used, but we see things like download figures, and so things like our monthly downloads, it's continuing on a pretty steady linear course upwards, as it has really since the beginning of the project. There's no real sign of that slowing down, downloads is a difficult thing to measure because of the amount of automated systems using it. But we see about 1.4 million monthly downloads of the library, and we believe around 100,000 daily builds conducted using test containers, based on one of the other download statistics we have. Well, that's huge. That's huge. We have some questions about Java and other adjacent topics, but first I have to let the audience know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics big, small, and strange. Compiler comes to you from the makers of Command Line Heroes, another of our sponsors, and is hosted by Angela Andrews and Brent Simoneau. Technology can be big, bold, bizarre, and complicated. Compiler unravels industry topics, trends, and the things you've always wanted to know about tech through interviews with the people who know it best. On the show, you will hear a chorus of perspectives from the diverse communities behind the code. Compiler brings together a curious team of Red Hatters to tackle big questions in tech, like what is technical debt? What are the tech hiring managers actually looking for? And do you have to know how to code to get started in open source? The first episode covers a topic of much debate in the tech world: should managers code? Jumping in to fix the problem can be very seductive. In this episode of Compiler, you'll hear from a manager who has learned that supporting his team to fix the problem rather than doing it himself might be slower, but it can lead to better results. A managerial position is seen as a milestone of working life. Suddenly, a person who worked on code begins to step back from those day-to-day tasks. What does that mean? What started as an internal email at Red Hat blossomed into a much deeper discussion about career growth and what can get caught in its wake. Have you ever walked into an interview and asked to work through a coding problem on a whiteboard? If you were hired, how much of your time do you actually spend in front of a whiteboard on a job? And how do you interview for a technical position? Red Hatters cast a skeptical eye toward the dreaded whiteboard interview, but discover that it can have some real benefits. I checked out the first episode and found it very enlightening, and also, by the way, very relevant to today's topics on the show. So episodes are out now. Go and download them anytime, and be sure to check back for new shows. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll also include a link on this episode's show page. My thanks to Compiler for their support. So Dan, you had a question that came from the back channel.
I do have a question. Yeah. So we've got while we're talking away here, people are also chatting away in the IRC channel at TWiT Live, which is great. And we've got Jojo Dancer has a question, which came in before. He says, "What platformers?" Yeah, I'll get this right. I can't even get the question right. Excuse me. What platforms will these containers be running for? And is it only for Java? Is what he wants to know. So are we talking strictly Java support here, Richard?
It's a great question. So the primary framework, the one that I work on most of the time, is Java. But we have forks that have sprung up in a number of languages. So a lot of the time it's developers who have worked on a Java project and they've seen test containers and used it. And then they go to work in another language and build something similar, suited to the idioms of the language, of course. So we have Testcontainers fork for Go, which is pretty popular. There's also Python, Node.js, a few others. There's a few others floating around there. With Java has always been the thing that we have put the most time into. But I think with AtomicJar, one of the things we want to do is put more time and effort into each of those forks in the other languages too. I would really love to bring all of them up to have the same feature set, for example.
That's very, very cool that you got this support in other languages as well, though. Because, I mean, I'm hammering the point again here, but again, that's the whole community open source kind of spirit of everybody saying, hey, I'd like this to work in Go, or I'd like to work in whatever else. That is very, very cool. So on the kind of technical side, I was wondering what I would need to get started with test containers. What do I need to support this? Do I just need a Docker capable machine and some Java runtimes, or how would that work?
Yeah, exactly. The only dependency is Docker, or essentially a Docker daemon, something that talks to the Docker API. One of the things that Test Containers does is to discover what's available. So, for example, if you're running on a Mac, it will try to use Docker for Mac. If you're running on Windows, it will try to use the MPipe protocol to talk to Docker for Windows. And if you're on Linux, it will discover the socket, or even Docker machine. If you have Docker machine installed and that's your only way of running Docker, Test Containers will discover that and use it.
That is very cool. Sorry, carry on. Sorry, I'm interrupting you now. Carry on.
Sorry. I wanted to make it possible to declare your tests and say what you need, but not have to think about which machine it would be running on. So you might have a team where you have a Mac developer, a Windows developer, and Linux for CI. If there was any kind of coupling in the tests or the test code or test configuration talking about those environments, I would have considered that a failure. And we put all of that sort of discovery logic into the Test Containers library itself.
That sounds very, very cool. Now, containers are a huge thing right now. Obviously, for the last, 10 years or so, they've really grown with Docker and so on. Did you always know you wanted to use Docker for this, or did you look at, was there any other kind of competing technologies out there?
I'd played a little bit with containers before Docker came about, actually, and the principle of containers, the principle of a copy on write file system, already seemed extraordinarily powerful back then. But I was thinking about it more in a sort of platform as a service context, as Docker themselves were actually. I think Docker kind of it ignited a lot of different projects. They set out some really good abstractions and gave this sort of spark of excitement to containers, because they combined things together that otherwise you would have had to combine together yourself. So you might have had a 50-line bash script to create a Linux container and set it up in the same way prior to Docker. But with Docker, they condensed it down to single, simple commands that any developer could memorize and use.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, the timing of all this historically is at this point we're right in the middle of a pandemic, and I thought we were toward the end of it for a while there. Now it seems we're sort of back in the middle of it, and which actually may be a durable condition in the world. And it seems to me you've got kind of a ringside seat in observing what difference that makes. And I'm kind of curious what what you're seeing, in development. Suddenly everybody with an ordinary white collar position is working at home. But a lot of developers are working at home all along, and it may not have made that much difference for them, right? But maybe it does, and maybe it does for the organizations they work for and for their relationship with organizations. So I'm wondering if you have any observations on that and what any learnings may be coming out of that.
I'm not too sure, really. So from my personal background, I traditionally worked in an office environment. It was just the usual thing, and working from home would be a thing that I would do occasionally. I think the pandemic and the way that it forced everybody into a work from home environment changed a lot of things around how we use company resources. But I think we were already moving to a state where you could run everything you needed to on your dev machine and have VPN connections into what you needed in a production environment. I think as an industry, we were gradually getting towards being able to do a fully remote working environment, and probably the pandemic was the kick. That's kind of my view of it. From my personal view as well, it's like going from having an office job to a remote job for working for my previous company. That was one change, and it kind of made going to working for AtomicJar, where we are fully remote, much easier. And I think that may be a change that many people in the industry experience, is like you learn to work in a more asynchronous, offline way. You learn to collaborate without being face-to-face people, without having shared whiteboards to discuss things with.
Yeah, I mean, one thing it's interesting to me, just as an individual techie type in the world, is how much more time I'm spending caring about the displays I'm using, the storage I'm using, where the storage goes. And what's complicating it for me is I live in at least 3 places right now. So do I carry the backup drive around with me? Do I stick it in a cloud where, I've got many terabytes here of mostly photography in my case. But in your case, I guess a lot of people work on GitHub and stuff. I'm actually wondering in a way and this may be a completely irrelevant question, but it's just a curiosity on my part. What happens to the gear people use? Are they caring more about it? Are they using less corporate stuff? I know a couple of people whose employers are throwing equipment at them, which they didn't expect to have, because suddenly they're working at home and they're getting, here's a new laptop, use this one. So I'm wondering if you have a window on what's happening with that.
Only my personal observations, really. I do think everybody has put a lot more consideration into their home working environment, the setup that they have, purchasing equipment and so on. We saw like shortages of webcams, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic. It's been an interesting transition, interesting change. perhaps having invested so much in home working environments, people will be more reluctant to go back to offices, for example, because they actually feel not only comfortable working at home, but many of the rough edges have been smoothed over by the things that they've had to do during the pandemic.
So, I mean, I note from your bio here that you worked for in a high position at Deloitte Digital and Testcontainers. Now it's being used by Netflix, Spotify, Uber, pretty big brand name companies that are, in each of their cases, they're doing broken field running. They're possibly even improvising a bit. I'm wondering if you have any insights into what's happening inside those companies based on the kind of development and usage that you're seeing, and what that may be saying about what's happening in the world as well. Because I think every company is suddenly finding itself farther in the future than they expected to be.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't actually say that I have got any great insights into how our customers have changed in that context.
Yeah, well, so how can are you recruiting people? I'm wondering if you're just relying on the natural process of your own growth, which is or your organization's growth, which is prodigious from looking at the numbers you've got here. They see 1 million daily downloads. You mentioned 100,000 number earlier. You've gotten serious venture funding, but you're going to, as you grow, you're going to need people. What's involved in that?
Yeah, so AtomicJar, we're fairly small at the moment. We are only, I think, 8 people in total, right? Like this week. It's something where we are hiring through our network, but we're hiring in all sorts of roles. It's actually really interesting that we're not hiring so much in Java, which is the technology that Testcontainers itself started out in. We're hiring in all sorts of technologies because we are not just working on the library, we are also building products and services, and it takes all sorts of skills, things like Go, Kubernetes, other technologies that we need to build the infrastructure to support running a service. So yes, it's been interesting, and we continue to be on the lookout for people who have been involved in Testcontainers, or just people who have genuine good people who have generally good skills in a variety of technologies, and who are willing to work in a remote first company, of course.
So I was just going to ask, Richard, is there anything that you're particularly looking for at the moment? Because we a lot of projects, when they come on, we ask them what kind of things they're looking for. How would someone get started in getting involved with test containers?
So for people who are interested in getting involved with contributing to the open source project, then GitHub would be the place to go. So I think in the show notes we'll have the URL for the Testcontainers org on GitHub, and people who have used it will probably have ideas about ways to improve it. And of course we're receptive to issues there, and discussions as well in Slack. With regards to AtomicJar and people who might be interested in working for us, we're really excited to work with people who know things like Kubernetes, also people with deep container knowledge and deep Docker knowledge. That kind of thing is really interesting to us, because while we work on a library that sits on top of Docker, a lot of the time we are thinking about things and trying to solve problems that go deeper than Docker itself. So right down to things like Containerd and layers beneath the Docker product itself. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that we're working on, and many of people's skills are quite relevant to us. And I guess we just have to be careful to make sure we don't overwhelm ourselves with too many people to consider.
Yeah, so that's something I was going to ask about. I mean, obviously, in growing, because the company could potentially grow very, very quickly. Is that something that worries you, or is that a challenge to make sure that you don't overstretch yourselves and maybe try and run before you can walk?
Yeah, of course. We're not hoping to get 1 million CVs tomorrow, for example. We're fairly happy with the personal introductions, the networked applicants that we're getting. We've got a fairly good pipeline of candidates. But whilst we don't want to overwhelm ourselves. I think we do have a lot that we're working on, and we do need people for the company. So a modest good growth rate will be helpful for us for our engineering capacity.
Is there a challenge that comes out of having VC funding? Because I mean, it's not something I've ever really done, but it seems as though they would have expectations of you. Do they, as much as you can possibly speak to this, I suppose, do they set goals for you and say we'd like you to be X size? I'm
not sure quite how much I can say, but I would say that Boldstart have been actually really amazing as a VC. Their focus is mainly on developer tools, and they do get it. They get not just focusing on good developer tooling, but also enabling it to grow and to grow in a sustainable way. I've been really impressed, and we were very happy that we were able to talk with them and eventually secure their funding. So we have Boldstart. We have a variety of other investors as well, investors and advisors, all of whom have been nothing but supportive of a sustainable approach to growth. So focusing on developing the product rather than things like revenue metrics and things. I'm very happy with our investors and believe that they will help us to grow in a good way.
That's brilliant. And having been through this process, do you have any advice for anybody who might be watching? I'm not asking you to give away the farm here or anything, but if somebody's coming up to do a pitch for investors, do you have any tips or advice that might be useful? Is there anything you've learned through that?
Probably just be yourself, really. We spoke to a number of investors as part of the process, or potential investors. And I think when we opened up and allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, told the plain truth, it ensured that we actually attracted the right investors to engage with. We had the right investors and everybody had the right expectations from the outset.
I'm curious about how easy this was for you to do. And I ask because you don't strike me as a born salesman, and I don't mean to insult you that way, because I strike myself that way. I'm an extrovert. I love talking to people. I love going out and pitching, and I have an almost unbroken failure record at doing that. So I'm wondering, I mean, you've been very successful there. I mean, you got $4 million in seed funding, as you were saying, but you've got people from Puppet, Apache Software, Foundation, Object Style, Oracle, a lot of individuals. Did they just come piling in after the initial ones? I mean, what happened there that you got all these? I mean, it's an enviable pile of people that you got backing you there.
Yeah. So quite honestly, I'm a terrible introvert. I'm the biggest introvert in the world, and very frankly, it was my co-founder Sergey who did virtually all of the work with engaging with potential investors, and so whilst I personally have had a very, I think, quite easy journey in this, and I'm very grateful for that. He actually did have to work quite hard, but it was a case of a bit of luck about contacts, But also there was a really interesting thing as well, which happened during the pandemic, that all of a sudden talking to VCs from countries around the world. So for example, Sergey is in Germany, I'm in the UK. All of a sudden talking to a potential investor over Zoom was a thing that you could do rather than having to fly out to their office and give them a presentation. So I think that made a bit of a difference. We did have many advantages and privileges along the way, but the pandemic did open some doors that previously would have been closed before.
Oh, that's really interesting that the pandemic actually created opportunities as well, because we hear so much about all the things that it's denied us. It's nice to hear that there's some opportunities created there. So, Richard, I was I was wondering about your kind of forward direction with this. So the future roadmap and stuff. What's coming down the pipe that might be interesting? I know there's some things you can't reveal quite yet. Is there anything you can reveal about what's coming down the pipe and where you might be going?
Yeah, so trying not to give too much away about future products, but for users who may be interested, one of the things with test containers in the past, that when I talk to users, they say, "Oh yeah, we love test containers. It's great. We use it all the time." It's a shame that it's slow, but you are starting up a dependency. You're starting up a database. It takes some time to do that. It's unavoidable. Speed is one thing that I think we still haven't totally nailed. It's obviously faster than you have to install Oracle database from a DVD. It's going to take you all day to do that. We're much faster than that. We can start things measured in seconds, but I want to go faster. So a lot of essentially research work that we'll be doing within AtomicJar will revolve around speed of test containers for our users. Excellent.
So you're focusing on speeding things up and really kind of turbocharging it, I suppose. That sounds really cool. And we await a few, I know you say you can't tell us about future products, but we'll keep an eye out and await that with bated breath, I'm sure, because it sounds like, I think you've got something hidden up your sleeve there that could be quite interesting. So I suppose one of the other things I wanted to ask is about we've talked about getting involved in the project and people, how they can come on board and stuff. What's your kind of user base like? I know you've given us some figures and stuff, but is that continuing to grow at a set rate? Because it seems to be just expanding massively.
Yeah, it's a large user base it's a large and very quite diverse user base, although obviously I'm talking about the Java version of the library, which is diverse in context of within the Java universe, which isn't the entire universe. But yeah, we basically see steady growth on the metrics that we can observe, things like the downloads, the GitHub stars and things. So it's continuing to grow pretty pleasingly. And I think, personally for me, one of the things that we wanted to accomplish by launching AtomicJar was to be able to put in the time to supporting those users. So, for example, answering their issue requests and reviewing pull requests and things. When you have a growth of users, you get a growth of support demand, and it did reach a point where that was probably not sustainable. And so I'm really happy that with AtomicJar that we're going to be able to help our users more as we continue to grow.
Excellent. And I've been looking on GitHub at some of the stuff you've been doing, and I've just got to ask, what exactly is Duct Tape? Because the name really it intrigues me. It's another project a little side project that you're working on.
Yeah. So basically all of my embarrassing old open source projects are still sitting out there on GitHub. I really should clean them up. Duct Tape was a little library that I wrote for things like retries of code, using a Java functional API to ensure that unreliable things could be retried and would have time limits, that kind of thing. We use it in test containers. I'm not quite sure how much use that gets elsewhere.
Excellent. I just saw the name and I thought, I had to ask.
Yeah, it seemed like a good name at the time, I guess, because it's just for tying stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting down toward the end of our hour here, and it was always a series of questions we always ask, which can go long or short. But the first of those is there anything we haven't asked that you would like us to have asked, and that you can, fill us in on?
Honestly, I think we've covered a lot of the things that I expected to be talking about on this. It's been great to have your questions. They've been really interesting topics to discuss. I'm happy with what we've discussed so far.
That's good. So the next is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? That's one of our control questions.
I thought you said there would be no political questions in this.
There's a small area of non-political stuff with blockchain. It's a distributed database. Yeah. How's that political, right?
I wouldn't say I'm a fan because of the various impacts that it is having in a lot of different ways. Yes, let's leave it there.
Okay, and finally, what is your favorite scripting language and text editor?
Scripting language, whatever the situation entails, really. So, like, probably something among Python, Node.js, or Bash. Kind of depends if you need a specific library. Depends who's going to be using and maintaining the script. So one of those, I would have to say, and this will probably get me kicked out of the Geek Club, I do have a script in Swift, which is not a particularly common scripting language, but sometimes when you need to interact with Apple APIs, it's a decent solution to the problem. Text editor, nowadays, I'm a Java developer, so I kind of fall into the big bucket of people using IntelliJ IDEA for code editing, but also VS Code for anything that isn't Java, really. And Vim on the CLI.
How many command line windows do you have open right now? Is that I don't know if that's a legitimate question or not.
I actually closed them all for this, but I'm the kind of person who has hundreds of tabs in browsers, hundreds of tabs in terminal open. Most of the time, I'm a terrible.
And how many screens? How many screens do you have in front of you? That's another. I was thinking of going to two. Just two. Just two.
More mundane in that way.
The triptych of three. So I have a final question that just jumped in my mind because I'm thinking of all those years that I edited Linux Journal. I think for most of them, we never even imagined that containers would come along. It was, once they came along, it was kind of, obvious. We want to pull these things together. So a weird question might be in a closing one. What comes after containers? Is there some new thing that not so much obsolesces that, but encompasses it in some way?
It's a good question, and I wish I knew, to be honest. I think I'm too focused on containers at the moment. I believe they're great technology, and they're doing a good job for what we need at this point in time. I'll be really excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, it could be one of those things like, the solar system's done. We've got the 9 planets. We'll make do with that. Well, thanks so much for this, Richard. It's been a really great show. Love to check back later and see how your growth has gone, and how you're coping with so much success.
Thank you so much. It's been really nice talking to you.
So Dan, how was that for you? And
really interesting. It was really good to talk to Richard about what's going on, and I think it's nice to hear about. We talked a bit about the growth and the way the project's kind of come from humble beginnings to really, I mean, it's really exploding now with the amount of users and stuff. And it's really nice we get to talk to a lot of projects where that may have been the case 25 years ago or 20 years ago, but now they're very much like, corporate projects. And I feel it's nice to see somebody who's kind of just taking those steps into doing something new. As for the testing with containers, I mean, I'd never really thought about it before today, in fact, for how to use containers for these kind of tests. And it just seems so obvious. It feels like such a great solution. It's one of those things that you think, why hadn't it been invented before? It's a really great idea to be able to just fire up a container and do this. And it's good to see what they're doing. And it looks as though it's getting good adoption as well.
I was thinking, are there hundreds or are there thousands of companies and also .orgs that I've known that have started with great ambitions that are based on an idea. And I'm guilty of doing a number of these myself that don't make it, that are just a really great idea or seem like a good idea at the time and don't make it. And it's really wonderful to talk to somebody who's operating a project that took off on its own merits, that not only found what the marketers like to call an audience, but really just a user base, a base of people putting something to really good use, and figuring out a way to get ahead of that and to make it work. It's a real good, almost a controlled study of maybe, this is how it's done, when you actually are the dog that caught the bus, and then you end up running the bus. That then becomes something else. Then it becomes another metaphor. But yeah.
Yeah, I've got to ask, where does the dog catching the bus come into it? Because that's a new one on me. I've not heard that before. It's a good phrase, I've never heard it.
I don't know where it started. It's actually a phrase I've heard for a number of years that's been kicking around. And I think it actually came along in politics or something. Some newsworthy person who didn't expect to be successful said that I feel like the dog that caught the bus. So,
Fair enough.
I don't know. That's it. Maybe somebody in the listener base can weigh in at some point in the future and tell us where that phrase came from. I really don't know, but
we did have a great answer. One. Yeah, we did have a great answer from the IRC to your question about what happens after containers. Chickenhead said lids come after containers. So there we go.
well, that makes sense. Yeah, there we go. Somebody said it's a great show, even though it's about Java. Yeah, everybody has their loyalties. Like I had a teacher in college who's a guy named Ward, R.C. Ward, and he said he had Ward's law, which was, if it works, it's good. And I think that's true. That's one reason we've been here for 14 years. I guess it works. Mm-hmm. So, well, thanks, Dan. It's been a great show. Appreciate it. And tell us what you've got to plug. This plug time.
Oh, it's plug time. I haven't. I should think of more things to plug. I need a rolling scroll of plugs in front of me. Something, which people may want to check out is a podcast. I'm doing a new podcast about music. It's called On the Record, and you can find links on my Twitter. Ant is now frantically looking for the link on there, but you can find it at ontherecordpod.com, and you can look on there. And it's basically, we take a song each time and we talk about it. We talk about it on the record. So there you go. That was my attempt at a punny kind of title. But if you want to find out anything that I'm up to, you can head to danlynch.org, which is my website, or you can find me on Twitter as @MethodDan. And I think that's probably enough plugs for now.
That's great. And my plug is for next week. And that is Mike Schwartz of Glue. That's GLUU.org. I've known Mike for a long time, and he's been involved in an endless string of great projects, including his own podcast and lots of other things. But he knows an awful lot about identity and and much more. He's a real veteran of many projects and many wars. And I highly recommend him. He's a great dude. So we will see you next week. And until then, thanks for being with us.
If you find yourself talking to those virtual assistants in your house quite often, or maybe you can make your light turn on and off with the touch of a button, well, Smart Tech Today is the show for you. Join Matthew Casanelli and myself, Micah Sargent, every week as we talk all about smart stuff and the fun that comes along with it.